casting an ethereal glow over the desolate beach. Waves whispered secrets as they lapped gently against the shore, their soft sighs mingling with the occasional distant call of a seagull. The air was cool, carrying the salty tang of the ocean, and the sand beneath her feet was damp, clinging to her shoes with each step. Lena walked slowly, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. She had always found solace in the ocean's embrace, a place where her thoughts could wander freely, unburdened by the chaos of everyday life. Tonight, however, there was an unsettling stillness in the air, a sense of being watched that prickled at the back of her neck. The beach was empty, as it often was at this hour. Most people preferred the safety and warmth of their homes when the sun dipped below the horizon, but Lena had always been different. She found comfort in the solitude, in the gentle lull of the waves, and the way the moonlight danced on the water's surface. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp night air, and continued her leisurely stroll. The rhythmic sound of her footsteps on the wet sand was almost hypnotic, lulling her into a state of peaceful introspection. She thought about her life, her dreams, and the choices that had led her to this moment. The moon's reflection rippled across the water, a silver pathway leading into the unknown. Lena's thoughts drifted to her grandmother, who had passed away a few months earlier. She had often spoken of the ocean as a place of mystery and magic, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. "Be careful when you walk alone at night," her grandmother had warned. "The sea has a way of calling to those who listen too closely." Lena had always dismissed these tales as the whimsical ramblings of an old woman, but tonight they seemed to carry an ominous weight. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she quickened her pace. The sense of being watched grew stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. She glanced over her shoulder, but the beach remained empty, stretching out in both directions as far as the eye could see. The only footprints were her own, trailing behind her like a breadcrumb path. The wind picked up, rustling the dry seaweed and sending a chill down her spine. Lena's mind began to play tricks on her. Shadows seemed to move just beyond her field of vision. The sound of the waves grew louder, more insistent. She could almost hear voices in the surf, whispering her name, calling her closer. "Just your imagination," she muttered to herself, trying to dispel the creeping dread that gnawed at her insides. There's nothing out here. But the feeling persisted, and her heart began to race. She glanced around again, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The moonlight only illuminated so much, leaving large swaths of the beach shrouded in shadow. As she continued to walk, Lena's gaze was drawn to a peculiar shape further down the shore. It was difficult to make out in the dim light, but it looked like a figure standing near the water's edge. Her breath caught in her throat as she squinted, trying to discern whether it was a person or just a trick of the light. The figure didn't move, standing perfectly still as if waiting for something or someone. Lena hesitated, torn between her curiosity and the instinctual urge to turn back. She took a few tentative steps forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. The figure remained silent, unmoving. Lena's unease deepened, but she forced herself to keep walking, drawn by a mixture of fear and fascination. As she approached, the figure began to take shape. It was a woman dressed in a flowing white gown that billowed in the breeze. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her face was obscured by the shadows. Lena's footsteps faltered, and she stopped a few feet away, her pulse racing. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman turned slowly to face her, and Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The woman's eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her lips parted, and she let out a soft, mournful wail that sent shivers through Lena's entire body. Fear rooted Lena to the spot, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs refused to move. The woman took a step forward, her movements graceful yet unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Lena could feel the air grow colder with each step, the oppressive weight of the woman's presence pressing down on her. "Please," Lena whispered, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" The woman reached out a hand, her fingers long and skeletal. Lena recoiled, but the woman's touch was like ice, freezing her in place. The world around them seemed to fade, the sound of the waves dimming until there was only silence. "You must listen," the woman said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "The sea calls to you, but it is not a call of welcome. It is a warning." Lena's mind raced, trying to comprehend the meaning of the woman's words. She felt a strange pull, a compulsion to step closer to the water. The woman's grip tightened, her eyes boring into Lena's soul. "Do not follow the path," the woman warned. "It leads to darkness, to a place from which there is no return." Lena struggled to break free, her heart pounding in her ears. She could feel the pull of the ocean growing stronger, an irresistible force that threatened to consume her. Desperation gave her strength, and she wrenched herself free from the woman's grasp, stumbling backward onto the sand. The woman's mournful wail rose to a deafening pitch, and Lena clapped her hands over her ears, trying to block out the sound. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the sand as she fled from the spectral figure. The beach seemed to stretch on forever, the moonlight casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed in her peripheral vision. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted toward the safety of her car, parked at the edge of the dunes. She could still hear the woman's voice, a haunting echo that reverberated in her mind. "Beware the sea, Lena. It hungers for you." She didn't stop running until she reached her car, fumbling with the keys as she threw herself inside and slammed the door. Her hands trembled as she locked the doors and started the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness as she sped away from the beach. Her heart gradually slowed as the miles passed, the nightmare fading into the background. She glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman standing on the side of the road. But there was nothing but darkness. When she finally reached her apartment, Lena collapsed onto her bed, her mind still reeling from the encounter. Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of hollow-eyed women and the relentless pull of the sea. In the days that followed, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to her like a second skin. The memory of the woman on the beach haunted her, her warning echoing in Lena's mind. She avoided the ocean, the once comforting sight of the waves now filling her with a deep sense of dread. But the sea was not easily forgotten. It called to her in her dreams, the sound of the waves a constant, insistent whisper. She could feel its pull, a magnetic force that tugged at her very soul. She tried to ignore it, to bury herself in work and routine, but the compulsion grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena found herself standing at the window, staring out at the distant ocean. The urge to return to the beach was overwhelming, a siren song that she could no longer resist. She knew it was madness, but she couldn't fight it any longer. She grabbed her coat and headed out into the night, her steps quickening as she made her way toward the shore. The streets were deserted, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed. As she reached the beach, the moon cast its silver light over the water, illuminating the path ahead. Lena walked slowly, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The waves lapped gently at the shore, their rhythm a soothing yet ominous lullaby. She could feel the woman's presence, a cold, oppressive weight that settled over her. She followed the moonlit path, her footsteps leaving a trail in the damp sand. The ocean seemed to stretch out endlessly before her, a vast, dark expanse that promised both wonder and terror. As she reached the water's edge, she hesitated, her mind flashing back to the woman's warning. Do not follow the path. It leads to darkness. But the pull was too strong, an irresistible force that compelled her forward. She took a deep breath and stepped into the water, the cold seeping through her shoes and numbing her feet. The waves lapped around her ankles, their touch both gentle and insistent. As she waded deeper, the water rose to her knees, then her waist. The moonlight danced on the surface, creating a shimmering pathway that seemed to lead into the very heart of the sea. Lena could feel the woman's presence growing stronger, her voice a whisper in the back of her mind. Beware the sea, Lena. It hung. The wind howled through the empty streets as Emma pulled her coat tighter around her. The night was cold, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a ghostly light over the deserted seaside town. She had always loved the beach, its endless expanse a place where she could lose herself in thought and escape from the stresses of life. But tonight was different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a sense of foreboding that sent shivers down her spine. She walked briskly toward the shoreline, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The town was asleep, its residents tucked safely away in their homes, unaware of the strange pull that had drawn Emma out into the night. The beach stretched out before her, a vast, empty expanse bathed in the pale glow of the moon. The waves crashed against the shore with a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence, their sound a constant, soothing presence. Emma took a deep breath, inhaling the salty tang of the sea, and began to walk along the water's edge. Her mind wandered as she strolled, the events of the past few months playing out in her thoughts. She had moved to this small coastal town to escape the chaos of the city, hoping to find peace in the tranquility of the ocean. But the move had been harder than she expected, the isolation weighing heavily on her. She had made few friends, her days blending into a monotonous routine of work and solitude. The beach had become her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace in the gentle lull of the waves and the vast open sky. But lately, even the beach had begun to feel strange, the once comforting sight of the sea now tinged with an inexplicable sense of dread. As she walked, Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound carried on the wind. She stopped, straining to listen. It was a low, mournful wail, barely audible over the sound of the waves. Her heart began to race as she turned toward the sound, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. There, near the water's edge, she saw a figure standing still. The moonlight illuminated the shape, revealing a woman in a long, flowing dress. Her hair blew wildly in the wind, and she seemed to be staring out at the sea, oblivious to Emma's presence. Emma hesitated, her curiosity battling with her growing sense of unease. She took a few tentative steps forward, her voice trembling as she called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" The woman remained silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Emma's footsteps faltered as she drew closer, the cold sand crunching beneath her feet. The woman's stillness was unnerving, and Emma could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Do you need help?" Emma asked, her voice louder now, more insistent. The woman turned slowly to face her, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. The woman's eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her expression was one of profound sorrow. Emma took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman's lips parted, and she let out another low, mournful wail that sent chills down Emma's spine. She wanted to run, to flee from this eerie apparition, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. "Who are you?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. The woman raised a hand, pointing out toward the sea. Emma followed her gaze, squinting into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing, just the endless expanse of water stretching out into the night. But then, as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw a faint, flickering glow far out on the horizon. It was like a distant beacon, its light pulsing rhythmically in time with the crashing waves. "What is that?" Emma asked, turning back to the woman. But the woman was gone, vanished as if she had never been there. Emma's heart raced as she looked around, but there was no sign of her, no footprints in the sand, nothing to indicate she had ever existed. Emma's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. She glanced back out at the sea, the faint glow still visible in the distance. A part of her wanted to turn back, to return to the safety of her home and forget this strange encounter. But another part of her, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, felt compelled to investigate further. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the cold and the growing sense of dread, and began to walk toward the water. The waves lapped at her feet as she waded in, the icy chill seeping through her shoes and numbing her toes. She kept her eyes fixed on the distant light, its rhythmic pulsing drawing her deeper into the sea. The water rose to her knees, then her waist, the cold biting into her skin. She shivered, but she pressed on, driven by an inexplicable need to reach the source of the light. The waves grew rougher as she moved further from the shore, their crashing roar filling her ears. As she struggled against the current, she felt a strange sensation, as if invisible hands were pulling her forward, urging her toward the light. She glanced back at the shore, now a distant line on the horizon, and felt a pang of fear. But there was no turning back now. The light was too close, its pull too strong. The water reached her chest, then her shoulders, the cold now almost unbearable. She could see the light more clearly now, a glowing orb just beneath the surface of the water. It pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy, its light illuminating the dark depths around it. Emma took a deep breath and plunged beneath the surface, her eyes fixed on the glowing orb. The water was dark and cold, the pressure building as she swam deeper. She could feel the light's pull growing stronger, guiding her toward its source. As she reached the orb, she extended a hand, her fingers brushing against its smooth, cold surface. The light flared, blinding her, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming sensation of being pulled into the depths. She struggled, but it was as if the water itself had come alive, wrapping around her and dragging her down. Her lungs burned as she fought for breath, the pressure crushing her chest. She could see nothing but the blinding light, feel nothing but the cold, suffocating embrace of the water. Panic set in, her mind screaming at her to escape, to break free from the light's grip. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and Emma found herself lying on the sandy ocean floor. The water around her was calm, the pressure lifted. She gasped for breath, the taste of salt filling her lungs as she coughed and sputtered. She looked around, disoriented and confused. The glowing orb was gone, and she was alone in the dark, silent depths. She could feel the sand beneath her hands, the cold water lapping gently against her skin. As she struggled to her feet, she noticed something strange. The sand around her was littered with objects, old rusted shipwrecks, broken pieces of pottery, and scattered bones. It was as if she had stumbled into an underwater graveyard, a place where the remains of the past lay forgotten and undisturbed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled forward, her eyes scanning the eerie landscape. She could see faint shapes moving in the darkness, ghostly figures that seemed to watch her with hollow eyes. She shivered, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Then she saw it, a small, ancient-looking chest half buried in the sand. It was covered in barnacles and seaweed, its metal hinges rusted and worn. She felt a strange compulsion to open it. Her curiosity piqued despite the overwhelming sense of dread that filled her. She knelt beside the chest, her hands trembling as she pried it open. Inside, she found a collection of old, waterlogged papers and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The papers were illegible, their ink smudged and faded by time, but the box was remarkably well preserved. She lifted the box from the chest, its weight surprising her. It was made of dark, polished wood, its surface engraved with strange, unfamiliar symbols. She felt a strange energy emanating from it, a low hum that vibrated through her fingers. As she opened the box, a blinding light spilled out, illuminating the darkness around her. She squinted, her eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. Inside the box, she saw a small, glowing stone, its surface pulsing with a warm, golden light. She reached out to touch the stone, and as her fingers brushed against it, she felt a sudden surge of energy, a connection that seemed to transcend time and space. Images flashed through her mind, memories of a distant past, of people and places long forgotten. She saw a great city, its streets filled with people going about their daily lives. She saw the ocean, vast and endless, its waves crashing against the shore. And she saw herself standing on the beach, the glowing stone in her hand. The vision faded, and she found herself back on the ocean floor, the glowing stone still in her hand. She could feel its energy coursing through her, filling her with a sense of purpose and clarity. She knew now that the stone held the key to understanding the strange events that had led her here. With renewed determination, she swam toward the surface, the stone's light guiding her through the darkness. As she broke through the water's surface, she gasped for breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She looked around, the moonlit beach a welcome sight after the eerie depths below. She waded back to the shore, the stone clutched tightly in her hand. As she stepped onto the sand, she felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of her solitude lifted. She knew now that she was not alone, that the ocean held secrets and mysteries beyond her understanding. She walked back to her home, the stone's light illuminating her path. The night was still and silent, the wind a gentle whisper in the trees. As she reached her door, she glanced back at the beach, the waves crashing softly against the shore. She knew that her life would never be the same, that the stone had unlocked something within her. She felt a deep connection to the ocean, to the mysteries it held, and she knew that she would spend the rest of her life seeking to understand its secrets. As she stepped inside, the stone's light cast long shadows on the walls, its warm glow a comforting presence in the darkness. She smiled, feeling a sense of hope and purpose that she had not felt in a long time. The ocean called to her, its endless expanse a source of wonder and discovery. And she knew that she would answer its call, driven by the knowledge that there were still mysteries to be uncovered, secrets to be revealed. She placed the stone on her bedside table, its light a beacon in the night. She lay down, her mind filled with visions of the ocean and the adventures that awaited her. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was no longer alone. The sea had called to her, and she had answered. And in doing so, she had found her true purpose, her true self. The lonely tide had brought her to this place, and she knew that it would guide her on the journey ahead.